There are two main elements that most human beings perceive when listening to music: melody and rhythm. Melody is simply a collection of pitches. Depending on how these pitches are organized, they will be pleasing to some and not so to others. Rhythm, on the other hand, comes across as a collection of beats, so to speak, and regardless of style, when their timing is off, it is perceived negatively by all its listeners. And for those unaware, the interesting phenomena I want to point out in this lesson is that wrong notes played with great timing over a tight groove will often go by unnoticed, whereas the opposite, a great melodic line played with bad timing, will be apparent even to most musically uneducated ears. I'm Richie Zellin, and I want to welcome you to the Jazz Guitar channel. In this lesson, I want to demonstrate a little experiment to show you how and why rhythm is the first and foremost element most ears perceive, and often the ultimate factor that determines how you rate a performance. And be sure to stick with me, because after I prove this point, I will discuss several practice tips to help you strengthen your rhythm and timing. Next, I am going to improvise some typical bebop lines over a blues, but I am going to purposefully play with a weak sense of rhythm and timing. So bear with me. Now, that was awful. And it wasn't easy for me to play. Even though all the notes were melodically coherent, if you're like most people, you probably felt something was really off. So next I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to improvise using notes that clash with the harmony, but I'm going to do so keeping a strong sense of rhythm and timing. I don't know about you, but when I listen back to that, I'll take it any day over the first example where I played the right notes with a bad sense of timing. So I hope this proves my point, while at the same time reveals the answer to other questions. For example, have you ever wondered the reason why you don't cringe when you hear Miles or Coltrane playing outside, which are in essence wrong notes in relationship to the chord of the moment? And that is because their overall sense of timing is so strong that it unconsciously communicates to your ears, to your brain, that the clashing notes are intentional. And this is the case with lots of avant-garde and free jazz. But this principle holds true regardless of what style of jazz you are playing. And may I add that it was best summed up a century ago by Duke Ellington when he wrote, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." So, tips to develop good rhythm and timing. This is obviously going to be different for everyone depending on their current level. But for starters, I recommend practicing improvising or playing transcriptions of solos using a metronome at a very slow tempo. Did you know it is actually harder to play slow because there seems to be this inordinate amount of time between notes, especially when there are rests. And this is typically where most tend to rush or even get lost. But this is a good challenge because it will help your brain program the precise location of each beat within any given measure. Once you can nail the groove in slow motion, it is much easier to gradually speed it up. And this is what we call deliberate practice. And if you want to know more about how great musicians apply it, please be sure to check out my 3-part video series here on YouTube. It's titled, The 5 Practice Habits of Great Jazz Musicians. I remember a time in my life where I unknowingly developed some of my rhythm and timing skills by practicing with a metronome. Interestingly enough, my original intention was to improve my sight reading and at the same time acquire some bebop vocabulary. So I set out to read solos off the Charlie Parker Omnibook every day for a year using a metronome. And I did this using not only the C version of the Omnibook, but also the B-flat and E-flat versions, which forced me to play the solos not only in different keys, but also in different registers of the fretboard. And since I was not at all proficient in reading a lot of the syncopated rhythms, I had to set the metronome very slow for the first number of months. But by the end of the year, I was playing at a medium swing tempo, and not only was my head full of bird licks and my sight reading had improved, but to my surprise, I was playing with a much improved sense of rhythm. Another practice tip I recommend once you can play with fairly stable time is setting the metronome to 2 and 4. This will help you better internalize your sense of time and not have to rely on a drummer in order to be able to get a swing feel. Let me show you how I set the metronome for this. So let's say you want to play at 120 beats per minute. You divide that by 2, so you want to set your metronome at 60. So let's hear 120. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what you really want to hear is just 2, 4, 2, 4. So I'm going to set this at 60. And now when you hear the beats, the first thing you want to do to orient yourself in the measure is try to say 2 and 4 with the beats, and then add the 1 and the 3, and then you'll get the feel of what's going on. So let me play this at 60. 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This 4th tip is not for everyone, but I want to put it out there because I learned a lot from it. After I got into jazz, there was a time in my life that I moved to a city where there was little or no work for guitarists unless you were willing to play in a top 40 band, which I wasn't. So I decided to become a bass player in order to play jazz with piano trios that were in demand for hotels and restaurants around the city. And since musicians didn't know me yet, they didn't suspect I was primarily a guitarist, so they gave me a chance. And note, you never want to introduce yourself as a guitarist who also plays bass. Unfortunately, guitarists are notorious for being lousy bass players. And even though I could play a solid walking bass line, I want to admit that my weakness was revealed when trying to stay locked in with the drummer's ride cymbal, especially at higher tempos. And this is where I learned all about playing slightly behind the beat and ahead of the beat, which is something I had to work on at the time. And it really, really did wonders for my understanding of how to swing. And later I even worked playing bass with a salsa band. You know, I almost worked for 6 nights a week as a bass player for over 2 years until one gig changed everything. Someone discovered I also played guitar and called me for a gig. And in the course of a few months, the word spread that I was really a jazz guitarist and way better at it than a bass player. And to make a long story short, no one ever called me again to work as a bass player. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that you go out and buy a bass, but I do recommend that you listen to how the bass locks up with the ride cymbal in various recordings. Try to play a walking bass line on the bottom strings of the guitar and emulate the timing. Bottom line, try to differentiate when they are playing slightly ahead of the beat or slightly behind the beat. Let me demonstrate this concept. So I'm going to demonstrate playing slightly ahead of the beat over a swing tempo, and I'm doing a slow swing tempo at 95 beats per minute here, so you can feel the effect a little better. Next, I'm going to play slightly behind the beat, and this is something we often do when we play Latin music. So I'm going to set this in half time, 70 beats per minute, which is really 140 if we're thinking in 4/4. So I'm going to start off with a tumbao, a bass tumbao, which is a bass pattern used in Afro-Cuban music and salsa. My final tip for the more technically advanced player is based on emulating a great player's sense of time. It consists of learning a written transcription of a solo by any great jazz artist, and once you can play it on your own, proceeding to play it along with the original recording at the original tempo. These days I see lots of young players doing this on YouTube, and I commend them for it. And while this is not a substitute for learning the theory of how to improvise your own solo, it is a great way to master the nuances that great jazz musicians possess regarding rhythm. That is, great timing, use of accents, and dynamics. The main thing I have learned from great players is that when you internalize the precise location of each beat within a measure of time, you can actually play with the time. That's why great jazz players often feel that time is elastic. I hope these tips have been useful and you'll be able to incorporate, if not all of them, at least one of them into your practice routine. And as usual, I really appreciate your likes, comments, and if this is your first time on the Jazz Guitar channel, I want to encourage you to subscribe. Until we meet again, stay safe, be sure to practice, 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 and may peace be with you.